everybody. My name is Fraser Doherty. I come from Edinburgh and I was very kindly invited along this evening to share my story with you. The story of how I took my grandmother's secret jam recipe at the age of 14 and over the past 7 or 8 years have built a company that now supplies all of the big supermarkets in the UK. But before I tell you all about my story, I'd like to start by showing you a quick introduction video that gives you a bit of background, and then I'll tell you all about it.
Fraser Doherty is no ordinary 17-year-old. He runs a jam business which turns over 80 grand a year.
Well, I kind of started a little bit 2 years ago after my granny showed me how to make marmalade using her top secret recipe. I just started making it myself as a wee hobby and selling it to neighbours and sort of around neighbourhoods all the days. I was doing sort of church fairs and farmers markets and all that nonsense. But then obviously it kind of grew and really took over my life.
Fraser flogs his stuff at local farmers markets and a handful of delis. The idea of traditional jam being made at home by a 17-year-old is a winner.
What's this here?
Lemon ginger. It's actually chicken or duck.
That's lovely.
Fraser's most expensive pot goes for £1.40, and the good news is he's racking in the money. The bad news is he can't cook enough.
Well, at the moment the production is kind of the biggest obstacle I face, I would say, because I just can't produce enough jam from this kitchen.
Fraser's hit a production crisis, and here's the problem. Fraser can only cook 1,000 jars a week. The shops want more, but he can't cook enough. He needs to move production out of the family kitchen into a bigger factory so he can make more jam. Only if he does this can Fraser fulfill his dream of seeing Doherty's jams in the supermarkets. But to do this, he would need to produce at least 20,000 jars a week.
As much as I love my farmers markets, I kind of want to stop doing them and focus on supplying shops. Well, hopefully by the end of the programme I'll have sort of 200 stockists. If we've done that, we'll be doing very well.
Waitrose are opening 2 branches in Scotland and are looking for local products. They've heard about his jams and have phoned him up out of the blue. Fraser's determined to think big now.
The plan is to go from concept to supermarket shelf in 4 months, which most people would say is crazy to even think about trying to do that. Most big companies in this industry anyway couldn't do that. So certainly a lot of people have said that I'm being a bit over-ambitious, but I quite like the challenge.
With the Waitrose meeting weeks away, Fraser decides to do some research on rival products. In another high-risk move, he thinks he needs to develop a totally new product to catch Waitrose on.
They try and tell you that it's handmade and some of the women sitting in France somewhere handwriting these labels. Roses is made with 20% fruit. So, not very good for you. May as well just put sugar on your toast.
Jam sales have been falling steadily for the last 10 years because of the high sugar content. But Fraser spotted a niche in the market for a totally healthy, sugar-free jam.
Taking the sugar out of jam and making what is normally an incredibly unhealthy product into something that is actually quite good for you. So I'm going to go to this meeting and hopefully I'm going to like that idea. It's a bit of a risk because it's something that's never been done before.
Back to the kitchen to develop it. Fraser wants to ditch his traditional Doherty's jams and present Waitrose with a new healthy product called Super Jams.
Yeah, very good. Nice and gingery.
Today Fraser has a meeting with Citygate Design. He's seen over 50 designers already. If they can't come up with a label at a price he can afford, it's back to the drawing board and more time wasted.
So we're replacing Superman's S and Batman's Bat. It's so fresh and good, it's kind of personal to get out of the pack. The superheroes that we know and love are looking at the Super Jam, and the way you see Superman flying past there going, wow, look, it's Super Jam.
Fraser is happy with the labels and he's done a good deal with the agency. Less than 10 grand with the promise of repeat business. Now he can send the designs off to Waitrose for them to improve.
I feel great. I'm ready to go on to the next step, which is going.
It's kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I got really excited that this was the labels and that it was all done, and the reality was that it hasn't kind of been as successful as I'd hoped in that respect.
The future of Fraser's business hinges on whether he can get the labels right for Waitrose. So he tries again, and after 4 weeks of meetings and several designs later, he thinks he's come up with a winner and sends a new label off to Waitrose. The question is, will they like the designs, or will he have to lay out more money to please them?
He got back to me and he said he really liked them, and he's asked me to send over some samples. The buyers and the retailers are just hugely important to how this whole thing's going to work. So hearing from them and hearing positive things from them it's just amazing, and it means I'm just 1 step closer to the whole thing working. Well, I came on breakfast in March this year, and it was just a really surreal experience, kind of sitting on the couch with the presenters eating jam for breakfast, and ever since then everything's just taken off. Products launched, which was something of a trial, and there was no guarantee that it was going to be a success. The products flew off the shelves, they travelled around the country, and then I got a phone call from Tesco, one of the biggest supermarkets in the world, to say that they wanted to stock the range as well. When I first went into Waitrose and saw Super Jam on the shelves, it was just the most amazing feeling. That was the point at which I could go into a supermarket and buy a jar of my own jam, which I did, and stuck the receipt up on my bedroom wall. And that was just an incredible feeling. I'd spent years working towards that point, and that was when it finally felt really big. Thank you.
Very nice. Good juicy.
Well done, you look delicious, thank you. Would you spend my jam?
I've tried it before,
Alright.
and I really like it.
Cheers. Thank you. You really like it?
I've no idea what's coming next. I've got a crystal ball, and who knows where maybe in a year's time I'm just going to see where the wave takes me.
So I guess as you've just seen, my adventures as an entrepreneur began at, I guess, an unusually young age. And in fact, ever since I was a little kid, I was involved in coming up with little ideas to try and start my own business. And so one afternoon when I was 14, I was visiting my gran, and she was making jam in the kitchen in the same way as she had for as long as I can remember. That's a picture of my gran there. She's the one in the middle. And I got really excited about it and asked my gran to teach me how to make jam. And we spent the afternoon making a few pots together, and the same day I ran around to the supermarket and bought some fruits and sugar and made a few jars of my own. And before they'd even cooled down, I went around the neighbourhood and asked all the neighbours what they thought. And thankfully the neighbours enjoyed the first few jars of jam that I had made in the kitchen, and asked if they could start buying my homemade jam from me every couple of weeks. And so I started selling my jars of jam door to door in the local area. I came up with some labels on the computer at home. And after a while, the local newspaper heard about the story of a young guy taking his gran's jam recipes and turning them into a little business. And that That's an article from page 3 of the Edinburgh Evening News from when I was about 15, which probably just meant there wasn't very much happening in Edinburgh that day for something like that to make it into the paper. But following the excitement of being written about in the newspaper, I decided to leave school and I started working full-time on trying to turn my jam making hobby into my career. And so I soon found myself cooking jam all day, every day, in my parents' tiny little kitchen, cooking up to 1,000 jars of jam a week and selling them at farmers' markets and to little shops all over Scotland. Soon it got to the point where my parents couldn't get into the kitchen to cook the dinner anymore, and I realised that if I was going to make any kind of business out of this, I'd have to figure out how to move production into a factory. And so I started doing a lot of research, and I found out that sales of jam have been in decline for the past couple of decades. And that's mostly because jam is very unhealthy, usually 70, maybe even 80% sugar, and contains a lot of additives. And I guess it's got quite an old-fashioned sort of image. And so it became my ambition to transform the world of jam by coming up with a healthier and more modern brand. And hundreds of batches and dozens of recipes later in my parents' tiny little kitchen, I came up with a way of making jam 100% from fruit, without adding any sugar or anything artificial. And I soon had a few flavours that I thought tasted pretty nice, and probably quite naively decided I was going to try and sell them to the big supermarkets. And that was something that a teenager had never done before, so Channel 4 asked if they could follow me around to make a TV show about it, and that added a little bit of pressure. So I was then invited to a Waitrose Meet the Buyer Day, and Meet the Buyer Day I like to describe as the X factor of selling groceries to supermarkets. And hundreds of people show up and stand in a queue, and some of them have come up with a new kind of cake or sauce, and everybody gets their chance to pitch their idea, in my case to the senior jam buyer of Waitrose. And he said it was a great idea. He said it was very refreshing to see a teenager trying to reinvent something that's been around for hundreds of years. But he explained to me that there was a long way to go until I would ever have a product that could sit on the shelves of a supermarket like Waitrose. I'd have to set up production in a factory and create a brand that communicated to people why they should buy the product. I'd have to go back to him with a good price and do a lot more work on my recipes before he would be happy. But he promised that if I could do all of that, I'd be welcome to go back, maybe in a year's time, and he'd think about giving it a shot. So having met with Waitrose, it became my dream to try and get my products into their stores. And I began by trying to create the Super Jam brand, the look and feel of the whole thing. And I got in touch with lots of design agencies to ask how much that might cost, and most came back with quotes of 10, 20, even £30,000, which I'm sure you can imagine was somewhat out with my budget. But eventually I managed to convince a local ad agency to work with me pretty cheaply. And they did that because they believed that Super Jam would be a big success and maybe they'd benefit in the future from repeat business. So the designers and I sat down and had a think about what these labels should look like. And there's obviously a link between Super Jam and Superman, or so we thought at least, and decided to create the branding around a comic book theme. And we had a lot of fun writing jokes on the labels, and excitedly spoke of making a superhero costume for me, the Jam Boy, to wear at the launch of the whole thing. So we had this set of labels that I thought looked pretty cool, and certainly my friends thought were very funny, and I began trying to solve the problem of how we would produce hundreds of thousands of jars of jam to sell to the big supermarkets. And obviously at 17 I wasn't really in a position to build my own jam factory, so I would have to convince an existing manufacturer to work with me to produce the products on a big scale. So I travelled around the country from the tiny little islands off the north coast of Scotland to the big cities of England, trying to convince somebody to work with me to produce this Super Jam. And as I'm sure you can imagine, most of these huge publicly listed food companies were a bit sceptical of a 17-year-old turning up with no money and no experience, and in fact not very much more than just a set of recipes and this big ambition to transform the world of jam. But eventually I found one factory who had suffered from the decline in jam sales, and they had a lot of spare capacity in their factory, and they figured that maybe Super Jam would be the answer to their problems. So a few months later we figured out how to produce the recipes on a big scale, and I figured we were ready to start supplying Waitrose. Waitrose didn't agree. They explained to me that the fact that Super Jam was made completely from fruit and was all natural had all been completely lost in amongst all the jokes and humour of the comic book labels. They said the factory I'd chosen was too expensive and they didn't really like all the flavours I'd made, so basically everything that I just spent a year working on had to be thrown in the bin, and I started all over again. So I travelled around the country a bit more and eventually convinced the new factory to work with me. The designers and I sat down and had a really good think about who we were trying to communicate with, who was going to buy this Super Jam. And we clarified to ourselves that it wasn't kids and teenagers and my friends who might have found the comic book idea funny, but it was adults, and we'd have to communicate really simply that Super Jam was better for them than other kinds of jam. So having taken that new approach, the designers came up with a set of labels that were a lot more modern and simple and that got our message across with a website and a blog, and thankfully Waitrose Waitrose loved all that and they said yes. And that obviously meant we had to do the first production run, which was a really exciting and emotional day. I think we made about 50,000 jars of jam on the first day. I decided to go on a rock and roll style tour around all the Waitrose supermarkets, handing out samples and signing jars of jam and telling people all about my gran and my story. And so I think on the first day in one of the stores in Edinburgh where I'm from, they sold something like 1,500 jars of Super Jam, which was more jam than they would normally sell in a month. They'd never seen anything like it. And I think it got to the point where if anybody tried to go through the checkout who hadn't bought a jar of Super Jam, the person sat at the checkout would ask why not. And so then Tesco, one of the biggest supermarkets in the world, got in touch and asked if we could make enough jam to supply them. We've since gone into Asda and Morrison's and Sainsbury's. We had a big party when we sold the 1,000,000th jar. I got invited to go and have dinner with Gordon Brown at Downing Street when he heard about it, which was kind of cool. And the products even got put into the National Museum of Scotland as an example of an iconic Scottish brand alongside Iron Brew and Baxter's and Timmins Tea Cakes. The story was used as part of Orange, the mobile phone company's advertising, and probably the biggest promotion we ever did was we gave away a free jar of Super Jam to every reader of the Sun newspaper. And I think about 5.5 million people read the Sun every day. It's the biggest newspaper in the English-speaking world. And so my proudest moment of all as a Scottish person was being able to share the front page of the Sun with Susan Boyle. So we've had great success getting into all the big supermarkets and then kind of turned attention to try and figure out how to get into lots of little independent stores. And put this page on the website where we ask the people buying our products to tell us about a store in their area. And that's a really simple idea, but because of that we've had thousands and thousands of suggestions of stores all over the place, and that's really helped Super Jam to grow. I've gratefully received a number of awards along the way, and I'm not telling you about them to boast by any means, but the one that I'm most proud of is called the Global Student Entrepreneur of the Year Award. And that was a competition where about 700 students from all around the world were asked to go to Chicago in America and do a pitch about their business to a panel of judges who were really successful entrepreneurs. I think 6 of them were billionaires. And most of the other students in the competition were running .com businesses, software companies, .coms, and some of them had developed these electronic gadgets that nobody could really understand. And I was there selling jam and amazingly won the award. And so that was a real highlight for me. And I got to meet some other young people who were setting up their own businesses. And the guy on the right there was from Sweden, and he made the software that manages McDonald's employees all around the world. And the other guy at the time was running the 7th fastest growing company in Canada. So I got to meet other young people starting their own businesses, and that really inspired me. So I guess from the point of view of sales and media coverage and even winning a few awards, it's all been quite an adventure and I guess something of a success. And that's all fine and well, but something that I'm really ambitious for and really excited about is setting up a charity. And to give you a bit of background, when my gran originally made jam, she would make jam and scones and cakes. And she'd visit all the elderly people in her area who were maybe living in care homes or living on their own. And she'd drag my little brother and I with her at the weekends, and he'd play his guitar and I would tell him stories. And I guess it was something that my gran felt very strongly about. And so I thought it would be nice to try and do something like that on a bigger scale to kind of give back to my gran's generation. And so a couple of years ago we started running tea parties in community centres, in care homes, and schools, originally just in Scotland, but we're now doing them all over the UK. And we have live music and dancing and scones and jam, and it's really just an opportunity for the elderly people to get out of the house and make new friends and interact with young people, which for a lot of them isn't something they get to do very often. In the past year we've had about 125 tea parties. The biggest ones have about 600 people at them, so thousands of people have come along and hopefully had a nice time. As part of the tea parties, we have a Tea Cozy of the Week competition where the elderly people knit tea cozies to go in the teapots. And we've had all kinds of wacky designs sent in from all over the world. We've had a Jesus tea cozy, and this one's a mouse. So if any of you guys fancy knitting a wacky tea cozy, I've got a little video of a tea party that I thought I would show you just to kind of bring it all to life.
Today's tea party at Edinburgh's Meadowbank Stadium was set up by Fraser Doherty, the young entrepreneur who transformed his grand secret jam recipe into a multi-million-pound super jam business.
My grandmother taught me how to make jam when I was 14, and that's what started Super Jam off. When my gran originally made jam, she would make jam and scones and cakes, and take them to all the elderly people in her area who were living alone, and they were a little bit lonely, and nobody really visited them very much, and she would take my little brother and I with her at the weekends. And so I guess visiting and caring for the elderly was something that my gran felt very strongly about, and the tea party is an opportunity for me to give back to my gran's generation.
So what are you hoping that the tea parties will achieve?
Well, the idea is very simple. A lot of the people who come along here live in care homes or sheltered housing, or they live alone, and the opportunity to make new friends and have a bit of fun on an afternoon is quite rare for them. And so this is an opportunity for them to just have a bit of fun, some jam, and get up and have a dance if they like.
It brings back very happy memories of when I was a youngster, teenager, dancing in the city here in Princess Street Gardens and Marine down at Portobello. I just love this. It's just wonderful and can't get enough.
And why do you think it's a good idea to let all the older people come here this afternoon?
Lots of old people are on their own and they need some entertainment, and this is what is good for us. You know, it keeps us active, it keeps us moving, it keeps us meeting people.
That's a bit idea. Thousands of elderly people have come along and had a fun afternoon and made new friends, and I've got a wall covered in letters from the guests who've come along and just told me how special it is. One gentleman told them that it made him feel like a person again.
Fraser, I was hoping to get a scone myself, but I don't see any. They're all gone. Where's your secret stash?
We always bring more scones to each tea party, and every time we run out, I think everybody just enjoys the scones and jam, and sometimes they can eat up to 4 scones each.
Fraser had its first tea party last June. They have since seen over 100 events, and the plan is to roll them out on a regular basis across the country. The aim being not only to give the older generation a chance to go out for fun, but also to interact with the younger generation. How am I doing, Walter?
Yes, fine.
Should we try another turn?
Yes.
Okay.
Probably the best part of running the tea parties is interacting with the elderly people and just hearing their stories. Some of the guests are over 100 years old, and they've lived through wars, they've lived through the invention of television, all sorts of things, and their stories are just incredible and often inspirational.
And has your gran been on one of the tea parties? What does she think?
My grand's very excited about the tea parties. It's an issue that she feels very strongly about. To be able to give back to her generation is really special to me.
So I guess to try and raise a bit more money for the tea parties, a few months ago my gran and I decided to share our jam making secrets by publishing the Super Jam Cookbook, which has recipes for making jam and goodies with jam. and it's since gone on to become a bestseller. We've sold tens of thousands of copies and hopefully raised enough money to run hundreds, maybe thousands more tea parties. So I guess that's kind of my story, and perhaps what my story shows is that what can begin for anybody as a hobby in their kitchen or their bedroom or their garage or their garden shed, with a bit of love and imagination and support from the people around them, can grow into something amazing, can grow into something that changes your life. I know that Super Jam has certainly changed mine. Can grow into something that gives you a career and maybe an opportunity to give back to the community.